Hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Marino, and I'm the founder and president of Homeland Hempcrete. We're based in Bismarck, North Dakota, that is usually what the one of the main reasons opens the discussion on why we went towards down the path of prefab in the first place. Is that we're in a really cold, really limited climate here, prefabrication is just what makes sense for our climate. And that's what originally got us into it. But we started out in 2018 in the hemp building space, doing hand cast, and we did that up until 2022 is when we started to kind of dabble with prefabricated systems and starting to transition. And then last year we did exclusively that, and same thing for this year going forward is really our focus. So I will. I'm going to go over. I have just a pretty quick slideshow that is kind of just a shotgun of a handful of information here. I'll probably skim through a little bit of it, and then we can open it up for questions. Does that sound good?
Sounds perfect.
Cool. Let me get this, see if I can get this shared out. I will just go through a few slides. So like I said, we got into the space back in 2018. My background is really not in natural building or building in general. My focus, I went to school for operations, supply chain, and management, was in a handful of manufacturing roles in different facilities throughout my career before we got into the space. And in that same kind of time frame is when we started to carry and renovate rental properties. So that was kind of our first intro into the built environment, and really eye opener into what goes into conventional home building. And so that's where we started to question things a little bit with some of the materials we're using, and like how you start to feel after doing some different renovations on old houses, or using new products, conventional products on houses. And then what really set us over was when we had our kids, even more so health conscious, and our son is more susceptible to contaminants in the air, that kind of thing, has asthma. And so like we could tell really quickly when we're in an unhealthy environment. And that's where like, okay, well, we're doing all these healthy things for as far as like eating and exercise. We were living in Colorado at the time. That's just like what you do. And it's like, what other components of your life are you overlooking that could be improved on, and like where we could take a healthy living approach, and housing is one that seems like it's overlooked quite a lot. And that's when we really, where the worlds collided. We've been looking in the hemp space for a long time, as far as like working it into our diets, that kind of thing. But then it kind of everything came together when we combined those worlds and saw that hemp building was a really relatively simple way to solve a lot of the problems that we were seeing in the built environment. So I'm just going to go through some of my slides. These are some of these we'll cruise through them, but one of the ones I like to share, this was an example. I usually throw it in slides. I believe it's based on a 1,600 square foot house when we were speccing this out. But on average, you have 50 tons of carbon produced from a conventionally built home with 8,000 pounds of waste. This is just an approximation. With a Hempcrete home, on the flip side, we have up to 15 tons of carbon sequestered. This is in the hemp walls. You still have to make good sound decisions on other components, but hemp helps quite a bit. You're using a material that is regenerative and can be grown, and uses significant amount of what can be considered byproduct, essentially. Not always. Some crops are grown specifically for hemp building, that kind of thing, in our region. And when we put this together, crops were mostly grown for the seed, and then the stalks were a secondary market. If we didn't use them for building, they'd get burnt in the field, or left to rot. And so it truly was, and still is to a degree, a byproduct in our region. And so that's just where that comes from. It is cherry picking a little bit when you look at this slide, but it gives you a good picture of like, we're going one direction in conventional building, like race to the bottom. How can we make it cheaper and don't worry about what's going into it or the longevity, versus things where it's like, if we make a little bit more sound decision and think long term, like we can make a significant impact. That's really what we're after. So this stuff, I feel like everyone probably knows it, but we're using the hemp herd exclusively in our mix. So you can see a good picture there of a piece of stock with the fiber ripped off of it before it gets decorticated, and what you end up with the what looks like essentially wood chips, the mix that we use for building. Hempcrete, everyone here again should know this, I would think, but I just want to include this one. This was one of our first structures. It was a backyard, it was an office space, and then it was used as a woodworking space for a while, but it was really our proof of concept. And so I talked about it a little bit when I was talking to Gene and Ray a couple days ago, but how we got our start. There weren't so many workshops when we were really interested in the space. And so we really mostly taught ourselves and took the knowledge from a lot of great builders in Europe, from books that they put together and some videos, and then just applied it to our own project. And so this was our first project, basically a download of everything, putting everything into practice that we had consumed at that point. So some of the benefits of Hempcrete, a lot of this, I won't go into detail on a lot of these things, but this is really where a lot of these were the eye openers, especially like the mold resistance was really big for things like our son. And there's a lot of people that are coming to us now that are talking about like sick building syndrome, those kinds of things, where Hempcrete can be a simple solution to implement in those kinds of situations. I'm going to go on here. This is kind of a really basic illustration, but I kind of preach on this a lot and this was really what got us into the space, was that like we have all these complex layers and materials in conventional building, and they can be reduced or eliminated with a really simple, a timeless and natural solution, which is Hempcrete. And that's really what we're trying to get across, is that it's like we don't have to keep getting more complex with our buildings. Like we can solve the problems with really simple, reliable solutions. This one, I get some beef on it sometimes on because this is a cobwood house. I think it looks really cool, but this is what we get in a lot of people that are reaching out that are kind of outside the natural building space of like, this is what they assume natural building looks like. And we live in the Midwest, upper Midwest, and houses are very conventional, very kind of cookie cutter, and pump them out as fast as you can kind of deal. So this contradicts that extremely. We don't have a lot of variation in buildings, that kind of thing. And so this is the perception, and this is what I see in my community a lot of, like when we talk about natural building, is this is the assumption of what we're trying to build. And that's really not the case. I think I have a couple of pictures in here of some of the models that we have mocked up. But basically our goal is that a Hempcrete house can look however you want it. I mean, it can be indistinguishable if you so choose, or you can have some unique features. There are abilities to make it have that kind of natural flair, and that's kind of a nice piece of it, is where you do have that flexibility. This one here is interesting because I listed out 4 different ways that hemp can be applied. We have the hand cast, we have blocks, we have spray applied, and then we have prefab. The thing is, they're not all unique and isolated components. There's crossover within all of these, really. So like with our panel system, for instance, we use a form of hand cast when we're making them most of the time, but we've also spray applied panels really successfully. We've seen people spray apply blocks before as well, and hand cast blocks to a degree, as well as machines, that kind of thing. So they're all really kind of intermixed in a way, but it's really a simple way to think about when we're going to do a project, what is the implementation method that we're going to use on site, essentially, is how you need to think about it. I think this is one of my last ones here, and then I have a couple of videos here. But so what we do, we kind of already talked about it a little bit, but our focus is really on prefabricated Hempcrete panels. And so they're basically structurally insulated panels using hemp. And so we have our framing component built into the panels. That's our starting point. And then we infill them offsite. They do all their curing offsite, and then they get shipped in small segments onto the build site, and then all we do is assemble on site. And so there's still the work that goes into building. We can streamline a lot of that off site, but it takes a lot of the variables out and also reduces our time on site up to 10 times a reduction in time. And so I'll show you a couple. I think this one here is a video, the next one, just to illustrate. Let's see if this plays. Okay, so this is a time lapse. This was with Danny at the Lower Sioux in Minnesota. So this was December 15th last year. So it's a really nice December day. There's no snow on the ground, but it was still cold. It was like 30 something, 40 degrees. But couldn't really do that. Like that's a perfect example of our region. It's not really feasible to be doing that in the winter. But because we did prefab, we were able to do that in the middle of a winter day. That building is 520 square feet, roughly 740 cubic feet. That would have taken us probably about 4 days after framing was done to do that, plus another 1 or 2 days for framing. We assembled all the panels, and I was on the road ready to go home in about 4 hours. So that's an example of that, reducing that amount of time on site tremendously for any given build.
And that's framing and everything on there. So that's incredible.
Yep. Yeah. So we have the framing, the hemp, and then the next steps are typically the bracing and putting your top plate on, and the build can continue on after that. And so it's not uncommon. I think I have another video, and I don't have the finished picture of it, but we were able to, our last build in Louisiana, we were able to get a fully built house from walls to the roof on, and dried in within 1 business week, essentially 1 calendar week, which is really good considering, like, in that climate, especially where there's constantly rain. There was rain the days while we were there, where you want to get that dried in as soon as possible so you can reduce the amount of trapped moisture, that kind of thing.
And I don't know if you pointed it out yet or not, but the guys are moving that around, just manhandling that. There, you don't need a crane or a telehandler or anything like that. So now, yeah, you are using a skid steer to bring them over to you, but everything is being done by hand. What are the weight on those coming in at?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've kind of dabbled with both, and we found that this is kind of the differentiator between panelization and doing like full tilt ups, like where you're doing full size wall panels, where you absolutely need something like a crane on site. And that's why we kind of steered towards the panelization, because we have a lot more flexibility where we don't necessarily need equipment. And we found in some cases, like this build, for instance, and I mean, anything on first single story, that with our panels, it is faster actually to do it by hand versus using an attachment, grabbing each one and getting into place, that kind of thing. We're working on a couple solutions for that to minimize the amount of labor, that kind of deal. But it's really not that hard when you have a couple people, and it goes really fast, as you can see. And so the complexity is when you try to build up, where you do need equipment. And so it does slow down a little bit, but it's still possible. The weight ranges depending on the thickness. I think the finished one, I can double check after I get out of the presentation. I think it's somewhere around like 500 or 600 pounds. So they're not light, but with 3 people is the minimum usually, and we can get those tilted up. The last build in Shreveport, we did 9¼ inch panels, so they're a little bit lighter. I couldn't lift anything more than a gallon of milk for like 2 months straight. And so all I was there was to do connectivity between panels and the foundation. And so my wife and 2 other people lifted every single one of those panels. I think there was 34 of them. And they did fine without me. So yeah, I can confirm that after we get out of this here to give a better example, because it sounds like a lot, but when you're handling them, it's really not too bad. So this is just 2 other application methods just in comparison. Let's see if they play. So this was my first spray job I did with Cameron McIntosh in Merishon in Pennsylvania. So this is an example of a house that we did in Pennsylvania. I think that, so the nice thing about the spray applied, we had about 4 people on site, and it was like a very normal work day, as opposed to like a normal Hempcrete cast in place job is like Sometimes they're really long and hard days. But the spray applied day, we did about 400 cubic feet in the day, and very, very comfortably at that pace. And so just wanted to show that as another example. And then this is a cast in place job we did. You can see, so the days start pretty quick. And I think our fastest day was, you can see we're moving up the wall here now. The fastest day was about 275 cubic feet in one day. More like 200 per day is more common. But once you get up really high and you have to be lifting things up onto scaffolding things slow down quite a bit, to where your pace is much slower. And in this particular build, that top wall is, I think, just over 17 or just under 17, the top edge. And so you have a lot of scaffolding, and we had a couple different techniques to get materials up there, because it's just not feasible to move buckets at that point. But just to give that example, let's see if there's anything else ahead.
While you're sliding through, Rich asked a question on what's your exterior finish on these that are coming up. Now, I know you can do a couple of different options. What did y'all go with on there?
Right. So let's see. So I believe Danny's, this one, they did a siding on this one, which is actually more common, especially since this was winter. But so when we do a siding, we follow really closely to the IRC appendix pretty much throughout our process. And so we do the same kind of detailing if you were to do a siding on any kind of hemp line building. And so we do a vapor open wrap with furring strips, and then put our siding there, so we have that air gap in between. We have done plaster as well. I think I have a detail in here of that, but basically what we have to do, because we have our structural component on the exterior, we protect the studs and then use a flexible lath material for kind of bridging that gap over the wood, so there's no cracking. So we can do either. We just, in our region specifically, and some of the builds that we've done, lean more towards the conventional siding. Plaster is kind of a lost art, and you want to have there's limited availability of people that are really good at plastering, and so a lot of people usually just go with the easier option, which is usually something like a wood siding or something along those lines, is what we see pretty commonly. Let's see here. I did just wanted to get on, I think I have one or two more slides I wanted to show. I'll skip this one here. The IRC appendix, yeah, we can skip over this. We can definitely talk about it if it comes up. But it was just a couple things on kind of the community benefits and how hemp can be used in kind of that circular economy. And that's what ultimately we're trying to build in our region, is that we started out like, so our first build, we had materials. I had materials from Canada. I had binder from Pennsylvania. And it just kind of pieced it together. It wasn't super cost effective. It was actually almost as cost effective now, because prices are different now than they were then. But at the time, it didn't really make sense logistically, but it was that proof of concept. And now we're at this point where we're trying to kind of close that gap and create the tightest circular economy that we can. And so using local materials, both the lime, both the hurd, we're getting to that point. The supply chain is really close, where pretty much any builder can be using semi-local or at least regional materials. And that's really ultimately what we're after, and helping other people do that as well. The one last slide I will show you, and then we can jump to questions. I know Gene had asked about it, so this is just a little preview. One project we're working on, and we're actually supposed to be there right now, but we pushed the job one week, so I'll be down there next week. But this is in collaboration with Joel Holton at Grow Enterprises, and so this is a project in New Orleans. It's a transitional housing project with a nonprofit. It's really cool concept. It's really about that kind of temporary housing setup, having everything you need to last for a few months to kind of get you by until you move on. And so their goal is to build a handful of these. And so we had to come up with a design that kind of checks all the boxes for a small family, while also being pretty affordable. And this is what they came up with. I don't have any pictures of it together yet. We built the panels end of last year, and the site is now ready. So I'm going to be down there next week to do the install. That should take us about a day. It's about the same size as the one at Danny's. It's actually a very similar floor plan to Danny's. So we should be able to get that done in a day. But cool project to follow along with. So if you want to check out Grow Enterprises, and the Phoenix Project is also they're the nonprofit that's kind of putting everything together. So worth checking out, and we'll definitely be posting on that too if you follow along.
Nice.